The On Target Institute presents a teaching from the Men on Target small group curriculum. Now with today's session, On Target founder Vince D'Acchioli.
Hello men, how you doing? And welcome to session 48. This is our final teaching session. It'll be followed by a review of this important module, but this is an important session because we're going to be dealing with advancing the kingdom. If you remember, in our last session, we talked about this temple and being fit for the kingdom. Today, we're going to be talking about advancing the kingdom. How do I go out and make a difference in the world for God? And we're going to be talking about witnessing a little bit. But before we get into it, I want to remind you again to go to otm.co and download the handout materials for this important session and for all of them really. Under otm.co, you'll find On Target Institute drop-down menu and go right into downloadable resources to pick up the information that you need. We could also title this session, and it used to be titled Witnessing 101. And my first question for you is, does witnessing, the whole idea of witnessing, intimidate you? I don't know about you, but it did me for many, many years, because with that came the idea that somehow I have to go out and talk people into becoming a Christian. And I hope that what we're going to be unpacking during this session will take away some of that intimidation. Some years ago, I came across this acronym, FIRE, F-I-R-E. And I want to talk about these different letters and unpack what they mean in this context. And then I'm going to end this session by talking about the most comfortable and best resource you have for reaching people for Jesus. In the context of talking about this, when we talk about FIRE, I want to unpack these words. And it begins with family. The first word, first letter in FIRE, the word F, is family. And as we deal with family, I want to suggest to you that this is how we can begin to move forward in our witnessing attempts. It begins by asking questions about their family. When you're talking to someone else and you want to talk about Jesus, begin by asking them questions about their family. Are you married? Do you have kids? And as they're giving you the answers to these questions, you need to be making some mental notes about what they're saying, because you're going to come back to some of these things later. We'll talk about how you can do that in a practical way, because some of the things they're going to be sharing with you are going to trigger thoughts in your own mind of similarities that you had in your own family. But begin by asking questions about their family. Are you married? Do you have kids? And note their response. Any special comments about one or more kids that you can make note of, and I mentioned that already. And then for the I, what about interests? What interests do you have? What are some of their hobbies, the things that they do? For instance, I talked to a guy not too long ago who one of his hobbies just happened to be racquetball. And I'm really a fanatic about it. I love racquetball. And so I made a mental note of that so that I could come back full circle and talk about racquetball with him later. So we're building relationship here. We're building a level of trust as we're asking caring questions about family and what are their interests. Are there any that match yours? Work could be talked about here as well, but strive to get beyond just work. Don't just stay there, because typically the first thing we say to a guy is, what do you do? And we tend to evaluate people on the basis of what they do rather than who they are. But it's not a bad idea to discover some of the things they do vocationally, because again, there could be points where there may be something matching up with some things that you've had experience with over the years as well. And then you could begin asking them questions about religion. The R is for religion. Were your parents religious? That's a good place to start. Did you grow up in a church environment? I've asked that question a lot of people, and some people will say, well, yeah, when I was a kid, I grew up in a church and we used to go to church, but it was just something that we did as a family. And again, you're making mental notes. Another thing could happen. You could have someone say, yeah, my parents were religious, but I really wasn't that religious, but I did go to church, and I remember when I was a kid, I went to church, and I actually, at one point, I actually believed I became a Christian. I went forward when somebody asked me to come forward, and I thought I gave my life to Jesus, but honestly, I really haven't been doing that for years. Boy, there's an important one to discover, because then you can begin to go back there and talk about that. What drew you in the first place? Have those kind of conversations. So you see, you're making mental notes as they're sharing some of these points with you. The important thing here is remember that questions are really important, and listening carefully is very, very important. And then so when you ask them these questions about their religious background, ask them what they thought about it. What was it like? What did you think about, your parents either being religious or not being religious? And then the final one is experience. Talk briefly about your experiences now at this point. You're going from asking questions in the 3 areas to now beginning to feed back to them some of your experience in any of the above areas that spark an interest. For instance, you could go back to some of the things you learned early on in your questioning of them that had to do with their upbringing or their growing up, and you could say, you know what, I had a similar situation happen to me when I was a young boy, and you could begin to talk about that. Or maybe it's a point of interest that they have. Maybe it has to do with hunting or fishing or camping or something that you may be able to find places where you can share common interests. So again, you're building trust in them. And it's very important. Look for ways to let them know about how Jesus changed your perspective in life. Look for ways to now begin to share, you know what, as I was growing up as a young boy, I had a similar experience that you had. My parents went to church. I'll just take my own life as an example. My parents went to a Catholic church, and we just went to church because that's what everybody in our family did. And I remember early on as a boy going to church, but in my church, they didn't even speak English in those days. They spoke either in Italian or Latin when we were on the East Coast, and I really didn't understand very much, and it was just something I did, and I liked it, but I didn't really grow or get much out of it. And then kind of when I left home, I abandoned the whole church thing for a very long time, and then certain things happened in my life that caused me to maybe take a look at it again, and you could begin to unpack some things in your life that would help them understand where you're coming from. Because at the end of the day, let me suggest something to you right now, because what I'm talking about here is the most important resource that you have, men, in advancing God's kingdom. And I don't want you to underestimate this. This is very, very important. And the most important thing, if I were to ask you the question, what is the most valuable thing you possess in your life? You know what it is? It's your story. It's being able to share the experiences that you've had. The reason why we go through the fire, the FIR, the first part, is so we can gather data, gather information from the person we're trying to talk with. And then when we get to the E, the experience, we can begin to feed back some things that have happened in your life that will really engage them and pull them in. This is nothing that we should be intimidated about. So this is the point where you can begin to share your story and the things that you've experienced that led you to the place where you are now. Now, let me just close with some elements of an effective story, because I think this is important, because some people, they really don't know how to tell a good story, or they go on too long. Here are some elements of an effective story. Number one, keep it short. Don't go on and on and on. Don't provide more details than the person needs to have. Keep it short, keep it simple, and that's an important thing to remember. Focus more on who you are, not what you do. And that's a very important thing to understand. Highlight special experiences that you may have had along the way. And again, I can talk about some of the experiences I had and what led me to go give Jesus another chance. And what people really enjoy is hearing about what God did, listen guys, in your life. That's the best possible witness tool you could have. Now, I want to kind of conclude by reading something I read recently from Oswald Chambers, one of his devotionals. It was a March 10th devotional, and it goes on to say this: Preach the word, 2 Timothy 4:2. We are not saved only to be instruments for God, but to be his sons and daughters. He does not turn us into spiritual agents, but into spiritual messengers, and the message must be a part of us. The Son of God was his own message. The words that I speak to you are spirit and they are life, it says in John 6. And his disciples As his disciples, our lives must be a holy example of the reality of our message. Okay, even the natural heart of the unsaved will serve if called upon to do so, but it takes a heart broken by conviction of sin, baptized by the Holy Spirit, and crushed into submission to God's purpose to make a person's life a holy example of God's message. There is a difference between giving a testimony and preaching. Big difference, guys. A preacher is someone who has received the call of God and is determined to use all his energy to proclaim God's truth. God takes us beyond our own aspirations and ideas for our lives and molds us and shapes us for his purpose, just as he worked in the disciples' lives after Pentecost. The purpose of Pentecost was not to teach the disciples something, but to make them the incarnation of what they preached so that they would literally become God's message in the flesh. You shall be witnesses to me, it says in Acts. Okay, allow God to have complete liberty in your life when you speak. Before God's message can liberate other people, listen, his liberation must be first real in you. Gather your material carefully and then allow God to set your words on fire for his glory. Acts 1:8, but you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem and in all Judea, Samaria, and to the end of the earth. Guys, life implication, the man God intended knows the importance of deliberately seeking opportunity to advance his kingdom. Here are some questions for you guys. Has this teaching helped to remove some of the intimidation associated with witnessing? How and with whom can you use this information in a practical way? Remember, guys, we do not need to be intimidated. We need to understand that the witness and testimony is already what Jesus has done in our life. Now, have a wonderful time of discussing this, and don't be intimidated by your role in advancing God's kingdom. And until next time, don't forget about it. Thank you.